Thank you. So, everyone, welcome to today's local government education program brought to you by the University of Illinois Extension in cooperation with Illinois Broadband Lab, the Illinois Office of Broadband, and under collaboration with the Illinois Association of County Board Members and Heartland Forward. My name is Mike Delaney, and I'm an Extension Community and Economic Development Educator based here in Ogle County in the northwestern corner of the state. And today's webinar is an introduction to Illinois' BEAD challenge process. Take care of some housekeeping up front. We'll be recording today's webinar. At the conclusion of today's presentation, registered participants will receive an email with materials from today's presentation and access to the recording of the webinar. If you didn't register in advance for the webinar and would like to receive the materials, please put your email in the chat to let us know, and we'll make sure that you get put on the list for those materials. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat space during the presentation. We'll review the questions in a Q&A period following the formal presentation. I'd like to welcome our speakers today, who are very familiar to anyone who has followed University of Illinois Extension's extensive webinar offerings on broadband in Illinois over the last 2.5 years. We're going to start off this afternoon with Matt Schmidt from the Illinois Office of Broadband. Matt, please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks to you and all your colleagues at University Extension. Really appreciate the support. Well, folks, today's webinar is focusing on an exciting chapter in our broadband journey, and that is preparing to make use of the federal Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Funds, the BEAD funds. And so we have an allocation from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration totaling over $1 billion that's going to support round 4 of Connect Illinois. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can get the maps right before we lock them in and obligate ourselves to which locations we're going to connect with the use of those funds. And so as we advance slides here today, we'll talk a little bit about the agenda first, and then we'll dive right in. And so our next slide will show us what we'll be talking about. A quick overview of the BEAD program, the goals, requirements, and the timeline. We'll talk a little bit about our plan with the use of BEAD funds and preparing for them, the progress we've made to date, and also Volume 1 and Volume 2 of our initial proposal, which are currently posted on our website, open for public comment, and we will share with you what both of those volumes depict in terms of our path forward. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how you can engage. Every step of this journey, we've tried to make it as transparent and open as possible, incorporating input on our policy development and also trying to engage the public wherever possible. And so today is the next step in that journey. We look forward to talking about what lies ahead. And so diving right in here, we are going to overview the BEAD program itself. And so this was passed 2 years ago as part of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, over $42 billion devoted to the BEAD program. Those dollars were allocated on mostly a formula basis throughout the country. And in June of this year, we were announced to have $1.04 billion coming to us in that BEAD allocation. And so in that federal notice of funding opportunity and the respective guidance and federal materials that accompany it, it's very clear what the BEAD program is trying to accomplish. First of all, ensure that there is universal coverage across all unserved locations in the state. And so that's tying with the Federal Communications Commission definition of basic broadband at 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload. So 25 by 3. At minimum, we got to make sure that there are no more unserved locations in Illinois. And the BEAD NOFO also is very clear in prioritizing end-to-end fiber builds wherever feasible. And so that means extending fiber networks to the home, into the home, to ensure full scalability so that we can meet the needs of today and tomorrow. The BEAD NOFO also includes provisions for where alternative technologies ought to be considered. And I'll tell you folks, in Illinois, it's going to be an all hands on deck approach. We're going to need all providers of all types to help us meet our goals. And so if you're listening, we want to engage with you and help fill the map in and achieve our goals of universal access statewide. A second piece is prioritizing not only those locations that are unserved, but also underserved locations that have service below 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload. And so those will also be a priority for the Connect Illinois Round 4. And we're hoping to do as good a job as possible to ensure there are no more underserved locations in the state. The NOFO, the federal NOFO, further stipulates that community anchor institutions, as well as multi-dwelling units and other digital equity inclusion initiatives are eligible for funding in that order. And so what we want to do in Illinois is make best use of these dollars, pair them with other state and federal resources to make sure we put the state in the best possible position to compete in a 21st century economy and society. And so we're well on our way here in Illinois, but these BEAD funds are going to help us accomplish our goals. Now, in addition to those eligible uses, we also look to the federal NOFO for direction on how to run a subgrantee selection process within 365 days of approval of Volume 2. The clock starts ticking. And so fortunately, in Illinois, we're in a position where we have run state broadband grant programs for the last 4 years. We've had rounds of funding, and within each round, multiple waves of funding. And so that's going to help us set the right pace and cadence and approach for what is going to be a very busy year-long process in engaging applicants of all kinds in determining the use of those BEAD funds. Now, all projects that are awarded BEAD funds through that subgrantee process will need to complete their builds within 4 years. And so we look at this BEAD investment as generational, solving problems for the long term. And we want to balance that imperative with also the urgent need that Illinoisans everywhere have in getting better broadband today. And so that's the approach that we will be taking. And then finally, again, in lockstep with the federal NOFO, we want to do everything we can to make sure that broadband is affordable. And so you look at a holistic approach to broadband access. It's not just the network availability in your neighborhood and to your home, but it's also making sure that it's affordable and that you and your neighbors have the skills necessary to use your computer and to leverage the internet to optimal ends. And so with that said, we'll dive in a little bit more in terms of how all these pieces fit together. As I had mentioned, we've been doing a lot of this already. So the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program is in full swing. Right now, we are completing merit review and mapping review elements of round 3, and we'll be making awards to applicants in the coming weeks and months. And then as we wind down round 3 of Connect Illinois, we'll be winding up round 4, which includes the BEAD funds. And so that effort is depicted in the top arrows across your screen. If you move down, you can see where we are in our BEAD planning process. And so the pink line shows that today we are well into the initial proposal planning, and we are moving forward with the outreach and implementation regarding the BEAD challenge process, locking in the map, making sure that we know exactly where broadband is and is not. And as those BEAD funds come online, we know where to direct them. Moving into 2024 and beyond, we will finalize our final proposal, which will show how each BEAD dollar is going to be used with whom in extending access to where throughout Illinois in our pursuit of universal access. And that final proposal, again, is due 365 days after the process begins with the formal NTIA approval of our Volume 2 of the initial proposal. Hopefully that all makes sense, but there's a very careful sequencing of events with the BEAD funding. Now, if you move down, this is not operating in a vacuum. You can see the BEAD implementation will begin in 2025 and run really throughout the decade until we use every last BEAD dollar, extending networks statewide. At the same time, we're doing a lot of work in digital equity right now. In January, we look to share for public comment our draft state digital equity plan. Right now, we also have our digital equity capacity Kickstarter program that will be making awards imminently. And so a lot of community-based organizations, local governments, other nonprofits can benefit from that kind of programming and state investment as we await the arrival of digital equity capacity grant dollars later in 2024. And so again, both on the BEAD capital network expansion front and also the digital equity initiative investment front, we'll be doing a lot of planning, outreach, engagement in the months and years ahead to get this right for Illinois. So now jumping ahead to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about our approach to the BEAD plan. And so you can see this journey that we've taken. It began earlier this year with a very ambitious approach to stakeholder engagement, including a 54-stop statewide listening tour that covered stakeholder visits in every one of our 10 economic development regions, a number of webinars and other engagement opportunities, including a phone survey and online survey complemented that stakeholder engagement. In June, as I'd mentioned, Illinois was formally allocated over $1 billion in BEAD formula funding. And then in August, we released our 5-year action plan, which summarizes a lot of the findings from our listening tour, as well as a good degree of quantitative analysis as we have approached identifying the need in Illinois and looking at how we can use the dollars available to maximize impact. And so that 5-year action plan is posted on our website. Just want to emphasize to folks that that is a guiding document. Nothing in there will be binding for the state. It really kind of sets some goals for us to follow as we move forward. And then that brings us to today, our initial proposal. And that initial proposal lays in more specific terms how we'd like to prepare for the arrival of BEAD funds, both in terms of running a mapping challenge process later this year, locking in that federal map, and then also how we plan on pursuing the subgrantee selection process. More elements involved in that initial proposal, including how we identify community anchor institutions and make sure that they are well represented on the map. And so much more that can be said here. And with that, I'd like to pass the mic off to my esteemed colleague, Shubika Agarwal. Shubika, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for level setting with overview for BEAD and what Illinois has been doing so far. So in the next slides, diving into the initial proposal. And as Matt mentioned in Volume 1, there are quite a few aspects with existing broadband programming and funding that's available. The two key aspects that we're going to be discussing today is the BEAD challenge process and also the identification of community anchored institutions in the state. So starting off with what is the goal for the challenge process? It is to improve the broadband maps, the accuracy of locations that are represented and categorized as unserved, underserved, and also locations that will be represented as eligible community anchored institutions. As Matt mentioned, after the BEAD challenge process, the map is going to be logged, and these are the locations that will be considered for BEAD funding. Who can participate in the challenge process? So it's essentially local governments, nonprofit organizations, and internet service providers. Residents can also participate in the process, but that's going to be through their local units of government and nonprofit organizations serving within their communities. What can be challenged? We have a few slides later on that get into specifics of the different challenges that are accepted. But just more broadly, it is broadband serviceable locations that are eligible for funding, locations that are covered through previous enforceable commitments or planned service. So this could be past state or federal funding for broadband deployment. So in case of Illinois, the Connect Illinois program through the various ARPA, CPF, state and local fiscal recovery funds, or through CARES Act. And then with the federal grant programs, that'll be programs like USDA Community Connect, Reconnect program, RDOF, CAF2, and some of those. Organizations that'll be eligible, the CAIs that'll be eligible for funding, and whether a particular location is a CAI or not. How can all of these entities participate in the challenge process? So we'll get into some of the specifics today with like what you can do right now during the challenge process and just how to prepare for it. And then there's going to be more detailed how to webinar series in the future that gets into the specifics of the different challenge types, the evidence, and the state portal where the challenges will have to be submitted. So with this slide, taking a look at the current snapshot of the broadband map for Illinois, this is prior to accounting for all the enforceable commitments in the state. We see that we have a total of 4.2 million broadband serviceable locations. And just to recap, a broadband serviceable location is a business or residential location in the state, which basically subscribes to mass market fixed broadband services. So based on that, 3.8 million locations represented in green across the state are considered served. The remaining 9%, which accounts for nearly 366,000 locations, fall in the unserved or underserved category. So we have unserved locations or any locations that lack 25 by 3 megabits per second speeds, and underserved are those that have access to speeds between 25 by 3 and 100 by 20. The technologies that are used for determining eligibility for BEAD would be the wireline services and the licensed fixed wireless. So this essentially gives us a snapshot of what the maps currently say before we have incorporated enforceable commitments. Moving on to the community anchor institutions. So this slide basically shares the different categories that we have included as part of community anchor institutions. The BEAD NOFO defines community anchor institutions as those that provide critical services and support to residents, especially those in underrepresented communities. As Matt had mentioned, BEAD funds can be used for CAIs after we have covered the unserved and underserved locations in the state. And eligibility for CAI is defined based on their access to gigabit level symmetric service. So on the right here, we have the 7 categories that Illinois has included as part of community anchor institutions: schools or institutes of higher education, libraries, government buildings, health clinics, public safety entities, public housing organizations, and community support organizations. So if you want to add more to the categories for community anchor institutions, if there are recommendations for different categories that can be added, you can do so as part of the public comment period, which is currently open until October 31st. After this, when we submit the initial proposal to NTIA after revisions, we'll not be able to add any additional categories to what's already included. So just want to make that note for folks here. This slide gets into the details of subcategories under each of these. So we've identified a total of 23,800 CAIs in the state, of which, based on our analysis, 5,400 would be eligible for BEAD funding. There were various ways to define eligibility. So we've looked at connectivity through E-rate. We've also, used analysis from our middle mile provider, the Illinois Century Network, and CAIs that they provide service to. And we also conducted a proximity analysis to locations which are close to the gigabit service areas within the state. So again, we will be accepting comment on eligibility for CAIs. These lists are available on the Federal Broadband tab at the Illinois Office of Broadband website. So you can take a look at whether your institute is actually part of the list and if it is or is not included as eligible. And you can also submit that comment during the public comment period that's open until October 31st, or also during the BEAD challenge process, which is expected to start December or January next year. So that is when you'll be able to share more comments on that and on eligibility for your different organizations. This slide here talks about the different challenge types as part of BEAD challenge process. So it's basically 3 categories: broadband serviceable locations, enforceable commitments, and community anchor institutions. As we have been discussing, there's different types based on availability, speed, latency, data caps, technology, and if there's only business service available. For a lot of these, the evidence would be looking up the provider website or any prior communication that you might have had with provider in your area. There's more description of what these exactly mean. With enforceable commitments, as I had mentioned, it's basically any prior state or federal broadband funding that an area might have received. So as we share the map for the BEAD challenge process, there's also going to be information on how these different locations might have been covered through the state and federal broadband funding programs in the past. And there's going to be an opportunity to challenge some of that as well, whether some locations are part of other commitments or are not part of those commitments. And then moving on to CAIs, whether a location should be classified as a CAI and whether or not it's eligible for funding. Those are the different things that could be challenged as part of the BEAD challenge process. On this slide, we go through the different phases. Again, the Illinois Broadband Lab aspires to run the challenge process from December to March. The dates are pretty ambiguous at this point, just because the beginning of the process depends on when the state receives approval for the initial proposal, Volume 1, that's submitted to NTIA. So that's the reason we're not able to determine exactly when it's going to start, but there's always going to be communication on when that's happening. Here we lay out the framework for how we are planning on running the challenge process. So it has to be for up to 120 days. And there are guidelines for how long each of these different phases of the challenge process have to be. And because there's going to be probably holidays in this period, we're going to account for some of that and make sure that the process is as easy for all involved residents, organizations, and service providers across the state. So we'll definitely account for some of that to ease the process and make sure everybody is able to actively participate in the challenge process. So the first phase is going to be the challenge for at least 14 days. Again, it's going to be local units of governments, nonprofits, and internet service providers who can participate in this. We looked at the different challenge categories, and all internet service providers will be notified through the state portal that we're designing that if there is a challenge for their particular locations. The next phase is going to be the rebuttal, again, for at least 14 days. This is when the provider is going to have the chance to submit some counter evidence for challenges received for their service areas. There are 3 possible outcomes if the challenge is rebutted, locations are disputed. If the provider agrees with the challenge, then locations will transition to sustained. And if it's not rebutted, during the rebuttal period, the challenge will again be sustained. The next phase is the final determination through the Illinois Office of Broadband. That's going to be the entity making the final decisions on whether a challenge is disputed, sustained, or rejected. And finally, moving on to publishing the results of the challenge process. So we'll have to make the list of eligible locations available for at least 60 days prior to the sub-grantee process that the state is supposed to be running. And there's a lot of information that we're covering here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. And we have a few more presenters towards the end of the presentation, and we'll get to the questions towards the end. Moving on to initial proposal volume 2. There's a lot more information in this. Again, it's available on the federal broadband tab at the Illinois Office of Broadband website to take a look at. In this slide, we are looking at some of the main elements of the initial proposal, but there's definitely so much more. So firstly, it talks about the timeline for the BEAD sub-grantee process. So the state plans to run an RFI, request for information process, to get feedback from providers on the project area units that will be defined for the sub-grantee process. And then it also speaks about the 2 to 3 wave approach that the state is going to be taking for the sub-grantee process. Then it talks about the approach to prioritize the hard-to-serve areas in the state. The hard-to-serve areas are essentially those which have higher share of unserved locations, and these will be prioritized for the first wave of the application process for Connect Illinois Round 4, or the BEAD funding that's going to be starting out. The third aspect is the scoring rubric. So Illinois has tried to keep it mostly consistent with the scoring rubric that we are using for Connect Illinois round 3, but also ensuring that it is in sync with all the BEAD requirements. So we've tried to keep it consistent and easy for our providers who have been actively engaging with us through the past 3 rounds. So just trying our best to keep consistency there, but also ensuring that all the BEAD requirements are met. And then the other aspect is the stakeholder engagement. So how we're going to be supporting communities throughout the process and ensuring that there is transparency as we continue to share out some key milestones in the process. So like with today, the BEAD challenge process, and then moving on to the sub-grantee process, which form the key pillars and milestones of the BEAD funding program. In the next section, really talking about how to engage. So as we've been mentioning, the public comment period for the initial proposal is open, started October 1, and it's open until October 31st. You can go, we have some QR codes here that you could scan, or we'll also share links to these web pages so that you can directly go up to them and look at the drafts that we've shared for Volume 1 and Volume 2. Yeah, one key aspect would be reviewing the definitions for CAIs. If you have comments on different categories that should be included, please do share that as part of the public comment. We also have the lists of CAIs available on the Federal Broadband tab. So definitely please take a look at that if that's something that you'd be interested in. Eligibility, again, for CAIs is defined based on access to gigabit symmetrical speeds. And we also have a smart sheet page linked on the same web page where you can actually provide public comment before 5 p.m. on the 31st of October. A few points on how to engage before the challenge process. So now's the time when you can, now until December would ideally be the time to prepare to engage in the process. So we're going to be sending out pre-registration links to the challenge portal. Most likely by October 25th, there's going to be more information on this. Once you're pre-registered, the rest of the process would look a little more easier, and we'll have more specifics on that in future webinars. Designate staff or agency leads in your local government or your nonprofit to coordinate local challenges. Identified areas with limited or inconsistent broadband services, and share your interest to participate in speed testing efforts. So we're going to be having a presentation from the Internet Equity Initiative to share more about what the speed testing could look like and what that partnership could look like if that's something you're interested in as a local government or a nonprofit. Make an outreach plan. So again, try and include interagency coordination and make sure you try to get to most of the residents in areas that you serve so that they can actively participate in the challenge process. And last but not the least, consider entering into a license agreement with CostQuest. Again, this is not a necessity. We'll try and make resources available so that entities who do not have access to the fabric can also participate in the challenge process. But if you're a local government or nonprofit who would like to get more data for your service areas and for your constituent areas, then it'll just be easier having access to the fabric and then being able to manipulate a lot of that broadband maps data that's available out there. So we'll share, we'll have the CostQuest team share more about the different licensing tiers that are available and how to actually apply for them. So I'm going to now pass it on to the Internet Equity Initiative team to share about the device-based measurement that's possible through IEI.
Thank you, Shabika. And hi, everyone. I'm Nzinga Barbaroos. I'm the Community Project Manager from the Internet Equity Initiative at the University of Chicago. I'm also here with Mark Richardson. He's our Technical Project Manager. And we're presenting on leveraging device-based measurement for the Illinois State BEAD challenges. And then we're looking at this from a data-driven approach. So thank you everyone for coming and listening. I want to first start out with the question of how can we identify areas of need? So we know that lived experiences don't match current data, and we know that these data sources are not all inclusive and they can't give us an accurate picture of what's going on in people's homes and businesses. So instead, what we need is that lived experience data consistently and accurately being measured from individuals. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark to tell you more about how our devices can help and get us the data that we're looking for. Oh, and Mark, I think you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Nzinga. So our solution to this perceived need for better data is a software called Netrix. We install Netrix on a small computer. It's about the size of 2 packs of playing cards. And we connect it to a router or a modem anywhere folks get internet service, like a house or an apartment. The device then actively measures the internet connection and sends the data back to a central computer to be stored and analyzed. I'll get into the data details in a bit, but for now, think of the device as a health monitor for your internet. You can install the device and it tells you how fit your internet is. So when I talk about device measurement, I mean measuring with a dedicated device that's connected to a home router, as opposed to crowdsourced speed tests or ISP provided diagnostics. The cool thing about device-based measurement is that we can take performance measurements consistently over time. The science shows that the device-based approach produces better data than alternatives, and measurement over time provides a far more compelling picture of a household's internet health than a few scattered browser-based speed tests. Data are less biased and less subject to randomness than crowdsourced speed tests. And devices are also durable. They can be used for deeper assessment of broadband infrastructure. You get data that you can leverage for both the BEAD allocation decisions and project evaluation for ventures that receive funding. Next slide, please. So why do we think local government and nonprofits can benefit from Netrix specifically for the BEAD challenge process? Well, there are 3 main reasons. First, we want to give you a bigger net to fish with. Netrix has about 13 different diagnostic tools that generate performance data. Second, the device is easy to install. And third, the data can validate performance benchmarks with multiple measurements over time without needing a human to press go. Netrix collects data using 3 different speed test tools, some of which you probably know, like Ookla and Measurement Lab. We also have less common tools like iPerf, which can measure bandwidth using a different network protocol. All that to emphasize, you can measure a challenge location with 3 different speed tests with Netrix. And in addition to that, we collect latency to over 20 different servers. Beyond speed and latency, we measure how many devices are using a household's network, how many nodes lay between the household and services that lay outside the ISP's network, how often packets get retransmitted or dropped. We can even detect outages with the device. Now, understandably, you might be thinking right now that we're a bit nuts to go around asking people to put literal black boxes in their house for speed testing. But we've done a lot of work with residents in Chicago, and the feedback here has shown that our devices are user-friendly. They come with clear instructions. We've had very few participants struggle to install the device. Most have said they would likely refer others to the study. And we see, in general, a lot of excitement from folks to pitch in and validate their community's internet experiences. Our exit surveys have shown that our instructions are effective at helping folks set up the device. Almost no one we sampled had a negative experience. And the time investment to set up the device is small. For most participants, installation took less than 5 minutes, and no one we sampled took more than 15. Now let's take a little bit closer look at the data applications here. Can you press next on the slides? Oh, sorry, go back one more. Here we have a table of device data, and these are speed tests from Ookla and Measurement Lab. So each row represents one device installed in one household. Now, I don't want you to think so much about what these numbers mean or what they specifically say, other than noticing that there is green numbers, which are good, and then there are orange numbers, which are bad. And from this table, we can clearly identify households that are below federal minimum for unserved and underserved. And that's great. However, an ISP might come back and say, well, wait a second, this is just one value. You can't judge a household connection by one value. What time of day was the measurement? How far from the router? But remember, we are fishing with a big net. These households are not being represented by just one value. This here is a median value of 2 different speed testing tools from devices deployed for 2 weeks used to run 20 speed tests for each household. We are completely confident that these measurements are sound because we have so much breadth and depth in our measurements, in addition to the frequency at which we measure. It's hard to argue with that amount of precision. So fishing with a big net means that we can see the health of a household's internet connection from multiple angles. We can identify households with speed tests that clearly have outlier performance, as the figure on the left shows. But underserved doesn't just mean low speed. If we look at this chart on the right, we can see the same households that have moderate broadband performance might have latency performance that makes Zoom a nightmare. These locations should rightly be considered in BEAD allocations. If you pay for a service above a minimum threshold but don't see the benefits because of your latency, you should not be counted as being served. And our data has so much to offer in this process, but we cannot do this alone. Our devices help make data more accurate and less biased by removing a lot of human randomness in measurement, but humans fundamentally are at the core of this process to collect data which can serve the community. And with that, Nzinga will close us out with some more information about the partnerships we are looking to build. Thank you.
Yep. So with all this being said, there's still the fact that tech alone does not get much done. It needs human beings. And this holds true for our Netrix devices as much as any other piece of technology. In order to have a successful deployment of Netrix devices, capturing the data needed for these BEAD challenges, we're going to need all of our communities. So this is a community-based effort that requires working with nonprofits like local governments, community anchors like your schools, libraries, farm bureaus, housing complexes, small independent businesses, and any other community organization that you can think of. We need this type of inclusivity of all parts of our communities to get a true picture of internet inequities. And we can share our UChicago's tested outreach materials and resources from our own Chicago deployments to help you get started with your outreach efforts as well. So how this all works is that first you can reach out to us, UChicago, and then your local partners to recruit residents from your challenge areas in order to install devices. Your local partners will work with the state to determine these challenge areas, collect emails and addresses of interested households, and then share this address data with UChicago for device distribution. Next, we will work with your local partners to distribute devices, either by hosting a device pickup event or us mailing the devices directly to the volunteers and assisting them with installation. Then participants will install the devices and they will immediately begin collecting data. We can monitor this data during collection. We can also keep it all standardized and centralized on our cloud services. And finally, we will deliver insights to you and to your local partners, making sure that's formatted within these BEAD requirements. And all of the local partners will coordinate with their volunteers to help get the devices returned to us at the end of the deployment. So in summary, we want to help by making data collection not only easier, but more accessible. Data-driven policy is essential to address complex issues like BEAD funding. Our data is developed by UChicago researchers. It's also open source, accurate, transparent, and our device is very easy to use. We aim to help you make robust BEAD challenges by giving you the research-backed data points, a comprehensive picture of internet performance measurements such as speed, latency, outages, and so much more. With our device, you can take many measurements over a week without having to go in and manually take and record them yourself. And our device makes it easy for people who may not have the time or skill set to do these types of measurements daily. So we can still get measurements to people that need it who may not otherwise engage, helping us to validate people's experiences in their day-to-day lives. This will democratize the BEAD challenge process by allowing busy people to participate and share their lived experiences. So in this way, our device is really a device of equity for you and your community. Anyone who's able to, like open a box and plug it into the wall is able to partake in these challenges. And from my experiences as the community project manager and working out in the different communities of Chicago, the people who need the help the most are typically not always the ones that have the time to advocate for themselves. And so this is just a way to help us make this process easier for them through device-driven solutions. So thank you everyone again for your attention, and we would love to answer any questions you have at the end of this entire presentation after everyone else goes as well. And we encourage you to reach out to Shubika Agarwal at the email address below or to follow the link on this presentation for more information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nzinga and Mark, for sharing about that. Again, as we've been working with counties and nonprofits in the state, we've been hearing that there is need for more accuracy. People do not really, experience the speeds that are reported. So the state's just sharing this opportunity as a means to enable that connection. If your community needs more speed testing, definitely let us know, and we can help you connect with the Internet Equity Initiative and basically, get to more detailed sort of speed testing measures for your communities. So we are excited to make that connection for you if you think this is something your community or county wants to engage in. Now we're going to have our CostQuest team basically share a little bit about the fabric licenses and what that process would look like. So I'd like to invite Mark Gutman from the CostQuest team to share more about the Tier D and E licensing with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Shubika. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Gutman. I'm with CostQuest Associates. My group is responsible for the licensing and distribution of the fabric data files themselves. What we've been talking about a lot is availability challenges or other types of fabric challenges. One of the things you may need if you choose to participate in the fabric challenge process, or even if you're seeking an award, is a license to that data. So I'm going to walk you through that process. So there are two licenses that are available. The Tier D, as in dog license, is available for recipients or subrecipients or prospective recipients of federal broadband funds from an FBGA. So not only NTIA, but USDA, Treasury, pretty much the alphabet soup that was referred to previously. For the most part, those are ISPs, people who are interested in building networks, but counties and other units that are looking to build networks are also eligible for the Tier D license. What you do receive is the NTIA fabric file. The fabric file itself is just a text file. In the state of Illinois, it would be millions of records long. Each location, each BSL, as Mark indicated earlier, is identified with a location ID. And you get an X and a Y, a longitude and latitude, and then information about whether or not that structure is a CAI or other type of structure. So that CSV file is kind of the foundation of a file level challenge, not working individually on the map, but looking at hundreds of thousands or millions of records at a time. So the purpose is, like I said, so you can either seek an award, or participate in a challenge process. On the Tier E side, that's designated for units of local government, nonprofits, and the other eligible entity is an organization that already has an FCC Tier 4 license. Shubika mentioned getting into the BDC process. That is where you would get that Tier 4 license. So again, you'll receive the same file. It's an FCC fabric file, or I'm sorry, an NTIA fabric file, and it will be used only for the purposes of challenges. So if we could roll to the next slide. That tier license itself, like I said, is available through CostQuest contract with NTIA, and it supports, it provides fabric data that can be used for all FBGA purposes. It can also be used in terms of an ISP or a network builder to analyze other federal broadband grant opportunities. So beyond a challenge, it can also be used to decide if you want to build or pursue an award to build a network in a given area. We already have a large number of providers in from the state of Illinois who have the data already under Tier D. One other thing that can be used for very quickly is it can be used for filing challenges, like we talked about earlier, or determining whether or not an enforceable commitment exists at a location. So has broadband been deployed to a location or will be deployed to a location based on some other funding source? That was mentioned earlier, and the license allows that sort of purpose as well. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Really, it's a 4-step process to get that Tier D license. What you need to bring to our website, and the URL is provided on the last slide of our slide deck here. What you'll need is your FCC registration number, your FRN. It's a pretty easy process to get that if you don't have that. You'll need some other information about your organization. So who's going to be administering the license for your organization, a website that describes your organization. And very importantly, we need to understand one of the questions that we'll ask through our website is to figure out which counties that you're requesting are coming in through either which program. Is this prospective? Are you already awarded, or are you seeking to challenge? So before you start the process, it would be good to know the counties you're looking for and if you're awarded, prospective, or looking to challenge, because we'll ask you those questions in the process. And the next slide. For Tier E, it's a very similar situation. The Tier E license, like I said, supports the challenge process, and the eligibility is for those units of local government, nonprofits, and FCC Tier 4 licensees. The information we ask, thank you, is essentially the same as the Tier D. The major difference being if you are a nonprofit organization, we will ask you some questions about substantiating your nonprofit status. So we would ask for your FEIN, your Federal Employment Identification Number, or we may ask if you have a letter from an authority designating your organization as a nonprofit. So just trying to make sure you qualify for that license. And then if we could go to the next slide very quickly, because I know we're tight on time. The flow process of getting a license is pretty straightforward once you qualify. So the two upper diamonds on the left, I realize this is small, are referring to prospective or already awarded entities. Once you qualify for that, you can come in through the website, you'll request a license. So I'm in about the middle of the screen. You'll be asked for your awarded counties, like I mentioned, whether or not they've been prospective, awarded, or challenged. There'll be after you've completed that step, there'll be an approval process. So someone from my team looks at that request and they may come back and ask questions. If they don't, they'll approve it. The approval will generate another email to you saying, please come into our help desk and fill out the information we need for your license request form. Once you complete that step, submit it through the help desk. It's usually 1 or 2 business days. You should have your license file. So one of the critical things is just keeping an eye on that request to come into the help desk to figure out your license information. The process is effectively the same thing for the Tier E. You just have a smaller set of questions. It's just, since it's challenge only, it's just identifying the counties that you're willing to challenge or you wish to challenge, and you can also request the full state as well. And on the next slide, we've been rolling this Tier D process since about June in different states. Some of the things that we've noticed that slow down the process are when you're requesting counties under the same program, we'll see people asking or identifying the same county as being both prospective and awarded under the same program. When we see that, we tend to ask a question that might slow things down a little bit. We'll see requests for programs that aren't currently available. So sometimes we'll ask about that as well. Identifying a program and not putting any counties against it, that also brings up a question every now and then. And then the final one is applying for a license as an ineligible organization. And that tends to be the Tier Ds, people who are looking for fabric licenses for the NTIA purposes, but who are not seeking to become a recipient of federal funds. So this might be an engineering design firm, this might be a consulting organization, something like that. Those entities are not eligible for the Tier D. They can get the data through whoever their client is, but they aren't directly eligible in this process. So for that license, they can ask for it for the FCC purposes, but that's outside of what you can do on the NTIA side. And then let me just bring the last slide quickly. Here's a couple resources. The slides will be distributed Couple quick things. The Tier D application portal is open. The Tier E should probably be opening, I would assume, next week. It's in beta with a couple other states right now. So when that becomes live, I will let the Illinois team know. And then the last email address is our help desk. If you have questions about the licensing, please feel free to drop an email into our help desk. There's a FAQ, one link above, but use the help desk if you have any questions or you think you're getting stuck in the licensing process, let us know. With that, I will turn it back to the Illinois team.
Thank you so much for overviewing the Tier D and E licenses for us, Mark. Super helpful. I'm sure it helped answer a few questions for a lot of us wondering about licenses on here. Just want to clarify again, this is not something you have to do as a local government and nonprofit, because the state's gonna like ensure that there are other resources that you could use to participate in the challenge process, even if you do not have access to the fabric. But if you do represent a larger community and would like to have access to the fabric so that you can use the other data sets that are available through NTIA and just analyze the data on your end and make more sense out of it, I think will be super helpful. And if you're an ISP who's trying to like get the Tier D licenses, I know Mark mentioned that some of the Illinois providers already have the Tier D licensing, but if you are one who's trying to get it, and if there are any additional questions, yeah, definitely reach out to their email address mentioned here, but also feel free to reach out to the state for any specific questions or holdups you might be facing in the process. So before we get to questions in a moment, just gonna end it with some of the ways you can engage during the challenge process. So again, it's local governments, ISPs, and nonprofits. We're expecting to open the challenge process in December this year or January 2024, based on when we receive approval for our initial proposal, Volume 1. During the challenge process, it's going to be more like publishing links on your respective websites for submitting challenges, just because we realize that your communities might be you might be working in your communities and there's like a level of trust there that would enable like active participation in the process, conduct community outreach to promote participation, and or engage the participants in the speed testing efforts if you would like to do so, and then submit aggregated challenges to the state speed challenge portal. There's going to be more information through how to webinar series on the state challenge portal. So information and evidence that will be required for the various challenge types. How can local governments and nonprofits collect and aggregate challenges, what that would look like with specific screenshots from the portal so that you have a sense of how to go about the processes. And yes, basically making those submissions to the portal. We'll also be sharing communications toolkits to support some of these outreach efforts within communities. So that concludes a lot of the material that we had for today, and I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm going to be looking at the chat, but Nancy and Mike, if you've already looked at a few questions, please.
Thank you, Shabika. We have a number of questions. Let's go back to one that doesn't appear to have been answered by Sim Khan. It's a multi-part question. He notes the Chicago map showed green. Does it mean all of Chicago is broadband ready? Digital equity shows lapses in access. Tying it to Mark's presentation, can community members not self-report? We'll take those first two questions.
So yeah, the maps currently, they're based on the data that's available on the FCC maps. So if a location shows up green on that map, yes, it would mean that based on current reported availability, it would be considered served. But again, through the challenge process, if you're a resident who's facing any of those different challenges with like availability, if the service that's reported for your location is inaccurate, that's when you can challenge based on speeds, latency, technology, and all the different challenge types that we had discussed earlier. Again, there's going to be more information on the evidence that would be acceptable for all of these, so that if you do not experience the speeds that are reported, you can certainly participate. And yeah.
Okay. Positive answer there. Next section of the question, as Matt mentioned, previous endeavors of conducting at this scale was a success. Wants to know if testimonials from organizations on the success of those efforts are available?
Yeah, Mark, I can take that question. And I think my comment was misinterpreted. I'm not sure of a state that's ever done a broadband mapping exercise quite like this. We're required by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to do a mapping challenge process like this. And so we're trying to play off of the NTIA's guidance as closely as we can. A lot of our past effort in Illinois has been focused on, broadband mapping of another kind that hasn't involved the public to this extent, or else administering one of a number of grant programs. And so just to be clear, this is the first time we're doing this, and our orientation is to support local governments, nonprofits, our provider community, and indirectly Illinoisans participate in this process. We take it seriously, but we also know that there's a lot going on for all of us right now. And so we're trying to be as clear as possible with how folks can engage in this process. And another point that I just want to emphasize here is the state of Illinois is the adjudicator in this challenge process. We are not in a position where we are directing where the challenges will take place, but rather holistically supporting those stakeholders that would like to participate in the process. And so just to be clear about roles there.
Thanks, Matt. We'll touch on one remaining point of the question. There's elements basically asking, how many organizations are you expecting to participate?
I'm not sure. I think from our standpoint, we really want to empower local organizations and governments and nonprofits to participate in this process. Certainly make sure that our provider community and those that I just named really understand what the process looks like. And so I don't know how many organizations will take part, but I don't want the state to be in a position where we're holding anybody back. We want to support as actively as possible.
Good, thanks. Next question, kind of a mechanical question. Per the slide previously shared, and this goes back a few minutes, if the 4 steps for implementing the Netrix device-based measurement solution are projected to take anywhere from 7 to 13 weeks, will this be feasible for local governments and nonprofits to implement ahead of the potential December start to the challenge process?
Sure. Just, keeping up on the chat dialogue. So this is above my pay grade in terms of, addressing a question regarding Netrix. I think the idea here is that we want to engage communities, nonprofits, those that would like to be part of this process early on. And so we want everybody to be in a position to be an active stakeholder and participate in the mapping challenge process when that process opens. It could be in December. It more likely will be in January. We've got a whole sequence of events, including formal NTIA approval of our intended approach before we're able to open that mapping process. But that's why we're having the conversation today. That's why we're talking about the licenses, D and E that were outlined previously. We want folks to know how the mechanics of all this works so that when that challenge process opens up, much of that lead time and that effort is behind us, and we can just really focus on engaging the public, getting feedback, and in following the next steps.
Okay, thanks, Matt. There's a question about device availability. Kevin Klin posits the question about how many devices you have available. Mark had answered it about having a solid stock of devices, but also stable channels for additional hardware. Kevin followed up with suggesting he's concerned about what a solid stock means, and then asks the concrete question: if an area which may not be truly served has 500 households, what is a reasonable number of houses that would need to be tested? 10%, 50%, more?
So I really want to put, our communities, nonprofits in a position to identify specific broadband serviceable locations that they would question what the map says in terms of service, under service or unservice. And so I think we want to have these devices get out to actual addresses wherever we can, so that we've got that data that's linked directly with the address. And so that's why we're starting this conversation now. If you're a local government, a community, a nonprofit, you know that there are areas of the map that are just inaccurate. Okay, let's start thinking about right now how you can access devices and how you can deploy them in your community so that you're able to get as many of those broadband serviceable locations producing test results as possible. We have the capability to do that. We have the lead time to do that. As you've seen on this webinar today, we have the partners in place to do that. And so now is really the time to be looking at the map and identifying at the community, nonprofit, stakeholder, individual Illinoisan and provider level, where is the map problematic? Where do we want to challenge it?
Sure. And Matt, just to add a little more context to that, we also have the area challenge as part of the BEAD challenge process. So to answer your question, Kevin, the area challenge that's part of volume 1 basically mentions that if there are 6 or more units within a census block where they can successfully challenge a service that's reported, that'll trigger an area challenge for the census block for that particular provider. So yeah, it depends on kind of the community, and if based on the different challenge types that we mentioned, if it's successful for a particular provider, that could help get a sense of how many speed tests will actually need for the community.
We're kind of bumping up against the end of our time. I think we've got one more question waiting that we can get to, but first I'd like to launch a quick poll, get folks' reactions to the information that they garnered today in the course of the webinar. So we'll launch that poll, and then we'll go back to that final question, and that is, actually, I guess there's another one that's popped in, but basically, can we participate in challenges if we have Connect Illinois? Can we, oops, sorry, slipped out. Can an individual resident challenge data stand in for a surrounding area, or only the individual?
So to answer this, a lot of times we'd want them to challenge for their own broadband serviceable location. And again, it's residents not directly submitting their data. It's going to be through their local government or participating nonprofit in the area. So if there is evidence with the local government that there are certain areas that do not have the reported service based on the different category types, that's definitely a possibility. So I hope that helps answer the question.
I think that sounds like a pretty definitive answer to the question. And we will conclude the poll. And I think that's about it. I think we've answered all the questions that have been posed. And certainly you have the opportunity offline in the future, because you'll have contact information for our presenters today. If you want to have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to them. I think we'd like to conclude things now, and I'll take this opportunity on behalf of the University of Illinois Extension to say thank you to everybody that presented today. A good, dense, informative presentation, and a lot of information, hopefully a lot of help to the folks who were in the audience today. As I mentioned earlier, if you were registered for the webinar in advance, you'll receive the presentation materials and a link to the recording in a follow-up email that should be in your mailbox in the next day or so. I'd also invite you to visit our website to register for future webinars at go.illinois.edu/LGE. For example, this Thursday, October 19th at 8:30, we kick off the next cohort in our 17-week Broadband Breakthrough webinar series. And then next week, on Tuesday, October 24th at 11 a.m., we're offering another program with rural partners on Illinois County finance and investments. And remember, you can use the same extension resource to find recordings of a host of other of our prior presentations on a wide variety of topics. So with that, again, great thanks to our presenters from the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab, and we look forward to seeing you at a future presentation. Thank you so much.